that is partially the fault of Nintendo making things too easy, because they do kind of tell you how to kill a boss before you even fight them, and that upsets me. Things like basically, if you think back, in one of our previous podcasts, we had Mike Diamini with us, and he said something like, in the past decade, Shadow of Colossus was the best Zelda game, and it wasn't a Zelda game. Because it was everything that Zelda was, but better. And specifically the boss fights. The boss fights didn't tell you how to beat the boss just by looking at the boss. And all the boss fights in Zelda tell you how to beat the boss before you even fight him. Like, you like the big fire guy in Twilight Princess. Okay, he looked badass in the trailer, but then you fight him, and look, he has chain on the ground. Grab his chain, put on the iron boots, pull. He falls down, whack him in the eye. I mean, that's what all the fights seem like. So I honestly think Twilight Princess is probably still going to be easy, because I think it's still going to be Zelda, because that's what Zelda has been now forever. It's never really been a hard game. I mean, Majora's Mask had some difficulty to it, but most of that difficulty was involved in the side stuff. The actual main quest, to me, wasn't that hard. And especially if you decided, like my first ever time I killed Majora's Mask was 100% playthrough, and so I had the Fierce Deity Mask, and I'm like, really? Why do they have an item in the game that makes this just spam one button and you win? So it's not even fun doing it that way. And then, I don't know, like, the Adventure of Link is hard, but that's because of controller limitations. You know, having a game actually be semi-difficult and extremely fun is not something that Zelda has necessarily done in a while. I mean, I get that Spirit Tracks was more difficult than Phantom Hourglass, probably more difficult than Twilight Princess and like the Minish Cap and stuff, which is a lot of the recent releases. But at the same time, it really wasn't that hard. There was only a couple puzzles, maybe late in the game. Like one of the final puzzles was Zelda and the switches, in the final part of the Spirit Tower. I'll admit, that was one tricky SOB, and I am extremely pissed that I looked at our walkthrough to figure it out. Thanks, by the way, Demir, for that walkthrough.
No problem. The thing is, Zelda, it's true, Zelda never was really difficult, but the thing is, it's Twilight Princess in specific, I have a real qualm with that game about its difficulty. The reason why it's insultingly easy, because you have the boomerang boss, you have the bomb boss, you have the arrow boss. You know, it's stereotype after stereotype. There's nothing unique, nothing new to it. I mean, you can argue that the spinner was really the only unique part of the game, and Star-Lord was the best boss in the game, and we actually did vote him recently for the best boss for the franchise because he was awesome. And he was the actually only multi-tiered fight in the game. You had to fight him with his body. You had to then crush his skull. Even the final Ganondorf fight was actually 4 fights, one after another, and each of those were repeating the same thing over and over again. You know, it didn't have several phases. What this game needs is a final fight which requires you to use all the items in your inventory and basically apply everything you did before in the game, and they need new ways to kill bosses. I mean, it's stupid for us to talk about it because most of us have played most, if not all, Zelda games. If a new guy comes in and takes up Twilight Princess, he will find it hard. There's no doubt about it. But it's still, it needs more originality. Nintendo has stick to the old formula, but they have stopped evolving it. You had Legend of Zelda, which then evolved into Link to the Past, which then evolved into Ocarina of Time, and that's it. It stopped. There's absolutely nothing new. And everyone who tries to tell me that the stylus controls and the DS made for new Zelda games, I'm going to stab him in the face until it stops being funny. Because the stylus is the worst thing that happened to gaming.
Well, I don't think it was the worst thing that happened to gaming. I mean, the problem with the stylus is that there's a D-pad, and they don't even give you the option to use the D-pad to move. Like, they require you to use the stylus. And I mean, you can use some of your items with like the L and R, bumper buttons. So like, why you requiring the stylus, which we do use a majority of the items with, for our movement? I kind of get. I don't think it's the worst thing that happened. I think they did a pretty decent job. I just don't think they should have required that to be the only method. But I don't think it the question is, did it add anything to the game? And I don't think stylus controls actually added anything that you couldn't do with button presses just as easily.
Some people might have seen my video of the Kragma boss fight in Spirit Tracks, and most of you who watched it will have noticed that I managed to jump into the lava next to the platform for like 4 times in a row. I can't even begin to describe how much rage I had at that moment, because it was all a matter of touching the screen at the wrong spot, and it was 2 millimeter difference. It's horrible. I mean, the stylus is just not for gaming. I don't know how to. It does make the game hard, but not the right way of hard.
Yeah, well, because it made a simple task like jumping from. Well, that's jumping's a whole different thing in Zelda. Anyways, I think the biggest innovation they could add to Zelda Wii is giving us a jump button. I mean, just imagine, like, I've been playing, and I say that because I've been playing things like Assassin's Creed 2 a lot lately, and it really made me realize that I miss not being able to jump in Zelda. Having all these automatic jumps limits my exploration, because my character is only going to jump if I can make the jump. Well, I want to try to make the jump anyways, and if I don't make it, then I don't make it. But like, I guess to me it gives more freedom of movement and more freedom of exploration. But that kind of getting off the topic with like the difficulty. Like I said, I just wanted to progressively get harder. I think it could start off easy. I just want it to, like, with new controls, especially with these new 1-to-1 controls that they're claiming that the sword fighting at least is going to have. I want it to be easy to start with, especially for me, because it's going to be a completely new control scheme to me. So I don't want it to be hard right away. But I think it could benefit from being progressively harder. Like, I know people have been asking for a lot of change, and they said they're already going to change up just the order of things, like because it's usually dungeon field dungeon, and they're not going to do that in this game. I don't know if that's enough of a change, because by not doing that, what does that mean? That we do 3 dungeons in a row and then a field? It could still be the exact same experience.
One more thing I'd like to add, and Casey, I'm sorry, I know you can't speak because of me, but just this one more thing. What I want them to add to Zelda V is non-linearity. Zelda games in the past, 10 years have been extremely linear. But then when you look back and you see Legend of Zelda, the first one, you were never told which dungeon was the first one. You could go into a dungeon, you get to some point, and then you realize you miss a key or an item. You go into another dungeon, get the key, get the item, then go back and complete that dungeon. They did try something like that, and it was a horror show called The Temple of the Ocean King, and that's not the way to do it. So they should look back at Legend of Zelda and make Zelda V based on that, or the next Zelda, because Zelda V is probably done already.
I could note with that idea 3D.Game Heroes, because I was able to watch a live demonstration of that game. I actually put like a mini preview on the site, because the game is basically classic Zelda with elements that you wish Zelda had or used to have, and one of them is the non-linearity of the game. You go into you can go to any dungeon you want at any time, but you can only go so far in a dungeon, and then you realize, oh geez, I need the red key. Okay, well in Zelda, if you need, a certain key, you find it in the dungeon in another room. In this game, you might not even find it in a dungeon. It might be in a hidden chest behind a bush on the opposite side of the world. And you don't know that, because it doesn't tell you. You just have to figure it out on your own. And that's the thing that Nintendo kind of does with their games. It's not like I would have been fine with the difficulty in Twilight Princess if they just didn't tell you how to do everything. Because the actual doing of the stuff, I guess I'm okay if it's easier. I think they just need to make us think about it, make us figure it out on our own.